The domain of a function is the set of all possible real number inputs to the function. And if the domain has clear endpoints, then we'll use square brackets if the endpoints are included and parentheses if the endpoints are not included. And if the domain does not have an endpoint on the left, we'll use negative infinity with a parentheses on the left. If the domain does not have an endpoint on the right, then we'll use positive infinity with a parentheses on the right. So let's do a few examples. First example, f of x equals 3x minus 2 is a linear function. Now, a linear function can have any x value inputted to it, so any positive, any negative value. So that means the domain of this linear function is negative infinity until positive infinity, or all real numbers. The second example, g of x equals square root of x plus 5, does have some restrictions to the domain. And to find those restrictions, we could think about what x values can be plugged in here and which cannot. So for example, if we plug in 0, we would get square root of 0 plus 5, which is square root of 5. That's okay. So 0 is okay. If we plug in negative 1, we'd get square root of negative 1 plus 5, so we'd get square root of 4, which is 2, so that's okay. So what's a value that we could not plug in? Well, we could not plug in the value negative 10, because then we would get square root of negative 5. Square roots of negatives are imaginary, so this does not work. So some negative values do not work in this function, and the point at which the negative values that we cannot use start is actually negative 5. But can we plug in negative 5? Well, if we do that, we get square root of 0. Square root of 0 is 0, so that's okay. So negative 5 is actually the most negative value that we could plug into this function. So that means that the domain is everything greater than or equal to negative 5. As an interval, that includes negative 5 and goes to positive infinity. This last example is a rational function. H of x equals 7 over x minus 2. Again, we could see what values we could plug in. So we could plug in 0, because then we'd get 7 over 0 minus 2, so 7 over negative 2, so that's okay. We could plug in, let's say 10. 7 over 10 minus 2 is 7 over 8, which is okay. And really, for this function, we can plug in almost every value. There's just one value that we can't plug in. So since we're looking at division inside our function, since this is a rational function, the only value that does not work in this function is that value that makes the denominator equal to 0, because division by 0 is undefined. So we know that this denominator x minus 2 could not be 0. That means that x cannot be positive 2, because 2 minus 2 is 0. So what that means is that in this function, every single value works except for 2. The way that we'll write that as a domain is by saying we could have negative infinity up to 2, but not including 2, so we use a parentheses, or everything greater than 2, so everything starting at 2 going to infinity. So this, writing the domain this way with parentheses around 2, means that 2 is the only value that is not included in this domain.